Fewer than 10 unbeatens in college football now. Tennessee is one of those. They're up to number 3 in the AP poll. They're getting 15 first-place votes now after knocking off Alabama in that instant classic at Neyland Stadium, that knuckleball field goal that went in, the goalpost that no one will ever see again. Somebody's basement or the bottom of a river. This is what the college football playoff would look like right now based on the AP poll. The playoff rankings will come out for the first time a week from Tuesday, November the 1st. But right now it'd be Georgia, Michigan in one semi, Ohio State, Tennessee in another semi, with Clemson the odd team out at this point. But several more teams are going to have an ability to play themselves in. Alabama's going to be able to play themselves back into it. Ole Miss is unbeaten, but an underdog on the road this week at LSU, a game that you can see on CBS. And TCU has a big one as well against Kansas State. UCLA and Oregon play each other. So this is going to kind of work itself out over the second half of the season. Let's get Tom Fornelli in here to talk teams that will be able to play themselves into the college football playoffs. Some of them already have a loss, including Alabama. Tom, you got to think that Alabama still controls its own fate, but they've lost any kind of buffer that they might have had with that one loss. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, the loss to Tennessee pretty much erases the margin for error for the Crimson Tide, because even though some Alabama fans or SEC fans will want to argue that a 2-loss Alabama deserves to be in the playoff, until we see a 2-loss team in, I think it's safe to assume there's not going to be one unless there's chaos around the country. So Alabama goes into the second half of the season. Like I said, there's no room for error. They have to win out. They've got a couple big games against Mississippi State and Ole Miss, who are currently ranked. They've got LSU at Tiger Stadium. But what concerns me about this team is they did just lose to Tennessee, but they almost lost earlier this season to Texas in a 20-19 game in Austin. Quinn Ewers, Texas's star quarterback, was knocked out for most of that game, and the Tide still struggled to win the game. And I think that overall this year, this is an Alabama team that just doesn't seem to be as elite or as impenetrable as it has looked, or at least we're used to seeing in recent years. So now for the Tide, they not only have to win out, but then if they get to the SEC championship where they're playing either Georgia or Tennessee, in all likelihood, that's another really difficult game for them to win. And honestly, I don't have as much faith in them as being able to do it as I have in years past, because we saw that they can't outscore Tennessee, and Georgia is a very good defense, and this is an Alabama offense that has struggled. So this is a team that I think has to not only win out, but it has to be better in the second half than what we've seen.
Only one more unbeaten team remaining in the Big 12, and that's a TCU team that plays Kansas State this week. Kansas State 5-1 overall, the one loss to Tulane. If you're the Horned Frogs, do you have to be perfect, or can you afford one loss and maybe getting in, backdoor your way in at 12-1 in a Big 12 championship?
Oh, I think a loss knocks TCU out of the picture. Obviously, we don't know anything else that goes on in these scenarios, but just if you look at what's happening with TCU, and obviously the AP poll and the college football playoff ranking aren't the same thing, but this is a TCU team that now for 4 straight weeks has beaten a ranked team. It started off with the SMU game, but then it beat Oklahoma, it beat Kansas, it beat Oklahoma State. Now it's going to get a Kansas State opponent, that another team that is ranked and undefeated in the Big 12. And it can't get higher than 8th in the AP poll. It's like, what does TCU have to do to show people that, hey, we're pretty good too? And if you look at the remaining schedule, I mentioned the Kansas State game this weekend. They have Texas coming up later in the season. But other than that, the marquee games on their schedule have already been played, and they're still not getting enough respect for what they've done in those games. Maybe it's partially that a few of the wins have been close and they're not blowing teams out. Last week they fell behind Oklahoma State and had to come back to win that game in overtime. So I think this is a Horned Frogs team that can not only has to win out and continue winning, but they have to start blowing teams out. They have to start looking more impressive, because clearly if we look at how the AP voters are looking at this team, there are still a lot of skeptics out there about this Horned Frogs team. And if it comes down to a TCU team with one loss at the end of the year versus a one-loss team like a Michigan or an Alabama or an Ohio State, somebody who loses in the SEC or Big Ten championship game, I think TCU will lose out, so they have to be perfect.
Or how about a one-loss USC team with a loss at Utah, but it's still a team with a lot of flair, a lot of sexiness. Do they still have an opportunity?
Yeah, I think they do because of what you said. And whether it's fair or not, like USC, it's a big brand. It has a head coach in Lincoln Riley that has been to the playoff. It has a quarterback in Caleb Williams who might be garnering Heisman attention. And whether it should or not, these are things that end up mattering when it comes to the college football playoff rankings and trying to figure out which teams to put in there. But the one problem that the Trojans face is they've played one ranked team so far. It was Utah. It was Saturday night, and they lost. So when you look at the resume, they've got some big wins, some impressive wins, but trying to stack up at the end of the season when they try to stack their resume against somebody else and you see they lost to the ranked team that they played, that's a problem. And if you look at the rest of the schedule right now, the only other ranked team remaining on the schedule is UCLA. Notre Dame having a down season is a problem for the Trojans. So this is a team that needs to win out. It needs UCLA to keep winning to make sure that that game is a marquee matchup later in the season. It would be nice for it if Oregon continues to keep winning, and so that way, whenever USC gets to the Pac-12 championship, they are playing another ranked, highly ranked team, which will boost their resume. And it would really help the Trojans out if Notre Dame could get its act together to at least be an impressive team at the end of the season for that final game, because, you know, recency bias does mean a lot in the rankings. So to get a big win over Notre Dame in the final week of the regular season before the Pac-12 championship would be a boost to the Trojan stock.
And as you alluded to, they don't play Oregon in the regular season, could match up in a Pac-12 championship game, Oregon with UCLA this week. How interesting is it going to be if Oregon continues to win and the one blemish continues to be against maybe the best team in the country in Georgia, but in the fashion that they did it in week one?
Yeah, see, that is the dark cloud that is hanging over Oregon's head, because if it comes down to a situation at the end of the year where Oregon's a Pac-12 champion with a loss, but as we mentioned earlier, there's like maybe a Michigan or an Ohio State team that lost close in the Big Ten championship that only has one loss itself, and you start comparing the resumes, they are going to get hammered over the head repeatedly with the 49-3 loss to Georgia. People will say, look, Oregon already had its chance to show that it's worthy of being on the playoff, and it got its skull caved in. And that is a huge problem for it, but I think that this is a Ducks team that, you know, I think it's still pretty good. I think it has rebounded very well from that loss that you mentioned. They've got the huge game against UCLA, which could help maybe alleviate some of the doubts about this team. They've got a game against Utah coming up later in the season. If they win those games and they win out and get to the Pac-12 championship, they'll be playing another highly ranked team. So this is a team that has chances to maybe eliminate some of the stink off of it from a 49-3 loss to Georgia. So the Ducks have to not only keep winning, but they probably need to win impressively and blow out some teams just to show that, hey, we might have gotten blown out, but we can blow some teams out ourselves, and we deserve a second chance to show what we've got.
Last playoff hopeful that we're going to get to is a team that has not lost yet, the Clemson Tigers. They've got unbeaten Syracuse this week, and then no more ranked teams on the schedule, but a few that could be a little bit hairy at Notre Dame. They host Miami. They've got South Carolina, a team that's on the rise, and then likely an ACC championship game where you could play a ranked North Carolina team. Can they afford a loss, or are they in the same boat as a TCU?
Yeah, stop me if you've heard this one before, but the ACC is really letting Clemson down. This is a team that needs to be perfect. I think that they could get in with a loss just based on their history and their brand and the fact that they've won national titles, so maybe they would still get the benefit of the doubt. But if you look at that schedule, I respect a win over Wake. If they beat Syracuse this weekend, I will respect a win over Syracuse because I think both of them are good football teams. The problem is, nationally, the perception of Wake Forest and Syracuse is not very high no matter what their record is. And the fact that teams like Florida State, Miami are having down seasons in the ACC and wins over teams like that won't mean a whole lot to the committee. And then you add on that game against Notre Dame, which was supposed to be a marquee game, but right now is just looking like another game that Clemson should win and everybody expects it to win. So I think the Tigers need to win out to be safe, and I think they need to play and blow teams out and be impressive. Like, I think one of the things, Dabo Swinney is a great coach, and he's done a great job at that program, but I think a little too often he's happy just winning the game. He doesn't care if they win by 1 or by 30. I think Dabo should maybe start paying more attention to trying to win by 30, because if it's close, that's the ACC's lack of strength this year, and the overall strength of schedule that Clemson is likely to have at the end of the season will be used against it. So they need to be impressive in their victories.
All right, Tom Fornelli with us here on College Football Playoff Hopefuls, about 10 days away from the first College Football Playoff release. Cover 3 podcast, you can hear Tom Fornelli and our cast of college football experts on the latest episode. They'll give their best bets, their locks for Week 8 with a pretty good slate, including Clemson, Syracuse, UCLA, Oregon, and LSU Ole Miss.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.